The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of my small suburban home, casting long shadows over the piles of balloons, streamers, and party favors I had been gathering for weeks. At 60, I had grown accustomed to being the one who planned, the one who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and family milestones. But this time, it was my own celebration. I wanted it to feel special, not just another day in a life filled with obligations. Jake, my 35-year-old son, bounded into the living room with the energy of a child half his age, clutching a bundle of decorations. He insisted on helping, arranging banners and testing the weight of helium balloons. Watching him laugh as he tried to hold a balloon steady reminded me of how much joy these small moments still brought, even after decades of worry and sacrifice. Melissa arrived shortly after, her presence immediately noticeable. She glanced around with a faint, disapproving smile, making comments about the color of the decorations and the extra fuss I had gone to. Her tone was light, almost casual, but I felt the sting beneath it, even in small ways. She managed to make her judgments clear, and I reminded myself not to let it ruin the day. Despite the subtle tension, I moved forward, checking the cake delivery schedule, confirming the catering, and making sure the hall was arranged to accommodate the small gathering I had invited. Every detail mattered. Every choice reflected years of careful planning and quiet effort. By late morning, everything was packed into the car, and Jake's excitement had only grown, his laughter filling the kitchen. As we drove toward the community hall, I held the steering wheel a little tighter, feeling the anticipation coil inside me, a mixture of hope and unease that this day would finally be remembered for joy rather than oversight. The doors of the hall opened, and the first boxes of decorations were carried inside, setting the stage for what I prayed would be a birthday worth celebrating. We arrived at the community hall just as the delivery truck pulled away. Boxes of decorations were stacked neatly on a folding table, and I felt a brief swell of pride that everything seemed to be in order. Jake bounced ahead of me, chattering excitedly about the balloons and the chocolate cake he had been anticipating for days. I set down the boxes and turned to retrieve the cake from the small cooler I had brought in, only to freeze in disbelief. The box was gone. At first, I thought it had been placed somewhere out of the way, perhaps by the hall staff, until I saw it tipped over, smeared, ruined, in the trash bin by the corner. My stomach twisted as my eyes scanned the room, and there she was, Melissa, leaning against the counter as if she had planned the entire scene, scrolling on her phone with that familiar, smug half-smile that always made my skin crawl. "Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what happened to the cake?" She finally looked up, rolling her eyes as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "You didn't deserve it anyway," she said, her words dripping with casual cruelty. The room seemed to close in, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The cake was more than dessert. It was a symbol of the effort, the love, the attention I had put into this day for myself and for Jake. I felt my hands clench, my chest tighten, and a wave of humiliation and anger wash over me. I could feel Jake's small hand in mine, his excitement turning into confusion as he looked between us. There was no audience, no one else involved, just the cruel calculation of Melissa's words and the wreckage in the trash. I bent down, took Jake's hand firmly, and whispered that we were leaving. There would be no fight here, not in front of him, not while the joy of the day was still fragile. Carefully, we gathered what we could, my heart pounding, my mind racing with disbelief and protective resolve. As we stepped out of the hall and into the car, I tried to focus on Jake's small smile, holding on to it as a fragile anchor while the weight of betrayal settled over me. We drove home in tense silence, the ruined celebration lingering in the air. And I knew I would have to decide how to respond before the next morning. The drive home was quiet. The hum of the tires on the suburban streets, the only sound between us. Jake leaned back in his seat, clutching his small dinosaur toy, occasionally glancing at me with a tentative smile, unaware of the full weight of what had just happened. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, trying to process the wave of disbelief and anger that washed over me. I thought about the years I had devoted to this family, every birthday, every holiday, every milestone I had orchestrated or sacrificed for, often without acknowledgement. The countless hours I had spent smoothing over disputes, paying for overlooked expenses, or quietly stepping aside so Melissa and Jake's father could shine. The years of bending, yielding, and being overlooked for the sake of peace. And yet, here I was at 60, faced with the same pattern. My birthday, my small attempt at celebration, had been trivialized, humiliated in a way that cut deeper than any forgotten present or missed phone call. I realized the anger was not just about the cake, but about decades of repeated disregard, about the invisible ledger of effort I had kept that no one else seemed to notice. Jake shifted in his seat, a small sigh escaping him, and I reached over to squeeze his hand gently, grounding myself in the one thing that mattered most. I promised him silently that we would make it right, that we would find a way to celebrate properly. Just the two of us. As we pulled into the driveway, I braced myself for the next day, knowing that the calls, the texts, and the consequences from Melissa and her mother were only just beginning. The next morning, I waited for a call, a message, anything from Melissa or my family acknowledging what had happened. Hours passed in silence. My phone remained stubbornly still, and the quiet made the previous day's humiliation settle deeper in my chest. Jake was busy with his breakfast, humming to himself, blissfully unaware, and I forced a smile for his sake, hiding the tightening in my stomach. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Laura's name. Relief fluttered momentarily, thinking perhaps someone had the decency to reach out about the ruined cake. I answered. "Clara," Laura began, her voice sharp with urgency. "You have to call the venue. Melissa's wedding might be canceled if the balance isn't confirmed." I froze, my grip tightening on the phone. You're calling about the wedding?" I asked, disbelief threading through my words. "Yes," she said briskly. "The deposit, the caterer, everything. We can't have a disaster. It's her big day." I stared at the counter where I had stacked the empty boxes and party favors from yesterday, the memory of the cake still vivid. "And the birthday, my birthday?" I asked slowly, voice strained. Laura's sigh carried a weightless dismissal. "Clara, that's different. It's not as important. Melissa's wedding is a family event. You know how she is. And this is her day. You have to handle it." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The betrayal wasn't just Melissa's. It was systemic. For decades, I had smoothed over problems, fixed issues, and made sure everyone else's priorities came first. Now the same pattern was repeating, and my own needs were invisible. I hung up, pressing the phone to my chest, feeling a cold resolve forming. The day ahead would not be dictated by their demands, but by what I would allow. I turned toward Jake, his small smile a reminder of who truly mattered, and began planning our own celebration, quietly deciding how I would take back control. As Jake played quietly with his dinosaur toys, I sank into the sofa, letting the silence press against me. Memories surfaced unbidden, decades of birthdays I had organized for others. Holidays spent juggling family expectations. Countless late nights covering bills and obligations no one had even acknowledged. Every time Melissa or my own family stumbled, I had stepped in without question, smoothing over conflicts, paying for what had been forgotten, and making sure the celebrations went on without a hitch. I remembered the Thanksgiving when I had driven 3 hours to bring pies and sides to a dinner that ended with no one even noticing the extra effort. The Christmas mornings spent buying gifts for Melissa's friends, while my own small gestures were ignored. The years of gently swallowing my frustration to avoid tension. Each memory carried a sting, a quiet resentment I had tucked away in the name of peace and responsibility. And yet, each sacrifice had also taught me something I hadn't realized until now: the extent of my own patience and the depth of my capability. For decades, I had been seen as the one who could fix everything, the one who would silently absorb the fallout and keep the family running. But the moments of being overlooked, minimized, or dismissed had also shown me where the line should be drawn. I looked over at Jake, his tiny hands busy with the toys, and felt a swell of protectiveness and clarity. The time for compromise and blind obedience was ending. I had given enough of myself to keep everyone else comfortable, and now I knew it was my turn to claim space for my own life and my son's happiness. I set my jaw and rose from the sofa, ready to confront what needed to change, aware that boundaries and assertiveness were the only paths forward. By mid-morning, I knew I had to set things straight. I dialed Melissa's number, letting it ring twice before she picked up with her usual clipped tone. "Clara," she began before I could speak, "I need you to call the venue. If the deposit isn't confirmed, my wedding could be canceled." I drew a slow breath. "Melissa, I am not handling your wedding. I will not cover anything, call anyone, or intervene in your planning. This is your responsibility." There was a pause on the other end, followed by an incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious. You're always the one who fixes problems. You can handle this. It's nothing to you." I felt my chest tighten, but the years of resentment and unacknowledged effort sharpened into clarity. No, I've spent decades stepping in for everyone else. That ends now. Your wedding is yours. I will not be used as a crutch. Melissa's voice shifted, half pleading, half threatening. "Clara, you're being unreasonable. Mom said I cut her off. I am not talking to your mother about this either. I've earned the right to set boundaries. I will not sacrifice my time, my dignity, or Jake's well-being to smooth over your mistakes." Her laughter returned, harsher this time. "You think you can just say no. You're always so dramatic. Everyone expects you to manage the family. That's who you are." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me, then opened them with calm resolve. I am who I choose to be, not what others demand. If managing the family means sacrificing my life or my son's happiness, I will step back. I will not be manipulated or coerced. The line went silent for a moment before she hung up. I set the phone down and let out a long exhale. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lifting. The hurt was still there, but beneath it, a growing strength and determination I hadn't let surface before. I glanced at Jake playing nearby, and a plan began forming in my mind, subtle, deliberate, and entirely under my control. I would reclaim the space and respect I had long been denied. The first step was simple: regain control of our own lives before dealing with the chaos Melissa and her mother had created. After hanging up with Melissa, I knew that taking a passive approach would only leave me vulnerable again. The first step was to secure what truly mattered: Jake's future and our independence. I called the bank and opened a separate account solely for his education fund. transferring every dollar I had earmarked for him into a space no one else could access. I updated passwords, checked all automatic payments, and confirmed that no shared accounts remained vulnerable to family interference. Each small action brought a measure of relief and a growing sense of control. Next, I turned my attention to the wedding logistics. I didn't contact anyone directly, but I requested copies of the venue contract and email correspondence under the guise of needing clarification about Jake's participation in family events. I began to track payment deadlines, noting when deposits had been made and where gaps existed. Every call, every email, every minor oversight from Melissa and her mother was cataloged in a simple spreadsheet. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about knowledge, preparation, and ensuring that if they faltered, I would be ready. I also began to keep a careful record of family interactions, the passive-aggressive texts, the tone of phone calls, the attempts to guilt me into compliance. For years, these small details had been dismissed, but now they formed a map of the patterns I needed to anticipate. My anger had shifted into something deliberate, almost clinical, and the clarity of thought it brought was energizing. Jake's laughter as he built a tower of toy dinosaurs beside me reminded me of why I was doing this. Every strategic step I took wasn't just for me, it was for him. To protect him from the fallout of decisions that were never his to make. With each documented email, each secured account, I felt a quiet power returning. The kind that came from knowing you could act without being cornered by the end of the day. The house was calm, the accounts secure, and my mind clear. The next challenge, I realized, would require patience and timing, but I was no longer waiting passively for the family to act. The following weekend, I arranged a small, private birthday celebration for Jake. Only a few of our closest friends joined us, people who had consistently supported me and who knew the effort and care I put into making moments like this meaningful. I ordered a fresh cake from the bakery Jake had chosen, a rich chocolate one with little dinosaurs perched along the top, just as he had imagined it. Watching him run to the table, eyes wide and voice bright with delight, I felt a warmth that had been absent for far too long. We spent the afternoon laughing, playing games, and enjoying the simple joy of being present with one another. Jake's happiness was infectious, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to fully experience it without the shadow of Melissa's judgment looming over the room. Every moment reinforced the truth I had been reminding myself of for weeks. My worth and my son's joy were not defined by anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, the consequences of Melissa's negligence were quietly unfolding. The vendors she had relied upon without confirmation began to voice concerns about payment and planning, leaving her scrambling to address details she had assumed I would manage. The stress, which had previously been deflected onto me, now landed squarely where it belonged. I did not interfere, and it felt strangely satisfying to witness the natural course of responsibility taking hold. By the evening, Jake's energy began to fade, and we settled down with cake slices and stories as I watched him carefully pick at each piece, savoring every bite. I realized how much control I had regained not over the family, not over Melissa's plans, but over my own life and over the happiness of the person who mattered most to me. I no longer needed validation from those who had dismissed my efforts. The evidence of my care and dedication was right in front of me. That night, after Jake fell asleep clutching his favorite toy, I sat quietly in the living room, a sense of calm settling over me. The anger from the ruined birthday and the manipulation I had endured was still present, but it had been tempered by satisfaction and a new perspective. I was no longer the passive participant in my family's drama. I had claimed agency for myself and for Jake. With clarity and quiet determination, I began considering the next steps, ensuring that this regained control was maintained and that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. The days following Jake's birthday redo were punctuated by a flurry of messages and calls from Melissa, Laura, and even aunts and cousins. Each text carried a thinly veiled expectation that I would resume the role I had always played, the one who fixed everything, smoothed over problems, and absorbed the consequences of their negligence. I read each one carefully, noting the patterns. But I did not respond immediately when Laura called. Her voice carried a hint of remorse I had rarely heard. "Clara," she said slowly, "I know yesterday was difficult, but maybe you can help us smooth things over. I shouldn't have asked so much of you." Her admission was partial, guarded, and far from full accountability, but it was a crack in the wall that had kept her blind to her own role. I remained calm, measured in my responses, focusing on clarity and strategy rather than emotion. I explained that my responsibilities now centered on Jake and myself, and that I would no longer be coerced into covering for their mistakes. My decisions were deliberate, each one reinforcing the boundaries I had fought to establish. As the calls ended and the notifications quieted, I felt a rare sense of empowerment. The pattern of manipulation that had dictated my life for decades was beginning to lose its hold. I understood, more clearly than ever, that protecting my dignity and my son's well-being required vigilance, patience, and unwavering commitment to the boundaries I had set. With these lessons in mind, I turned my focus to securing the future and preparing for the final step, permanent closure and lasting empowerment. Weeks passed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt wholly mine. Jake and I moved through our days with a quiet independence that I hadn't realized I had been missing. I continued to oversee his education fund, planned small celebrations for milestones that mattered to him, and embraced the freedom to make decisions without anticipating criticism or interference. The birthday motif returned in a quiet, deliberate way. I arranged a small celebration at home with Jake, a new cake from the same bakery, and a few close friends who had been supportive through the chaos. Watching him laugh, his eyes lighting up as he blew out the candles, reminded me of the importance of reclaiming joy on my own terms. Every piece of frosting, every gift, every simple moment of delight was a testament to the agency I had fought to restore. Meanwhile, the consequences of Melissa's and Laura's choices became apparent without any direct interference from me. Vendors contacted them regarding late payments and mismanaged logistics, and friends began noticing the strain that the wedding had placed on Melissa. I observed the fallout calmly, aware that accountability was unfolding naturally. Through it all, I remained focused on what mattered most, my dignity and Jake's well-being. The anger and frustration from previous weeks had transformed into a steady clarity, a sense of empowerment that no external drama could unsettle. Sitting in the quiet of the evening, Jake asleep beside me, I reflected on the path that had brought us here. Boundaries had been drawn, respect reasserted, and joy reclaimed. The birthday that had begun in disappointment had ended in triumph, not over others, but over the circumstances that once dictated my life. With the cake eaten, the laughter lingering, and the house calm, I finally felt the peace that comes from standing firm, knowing that my decisions were guided by what truly mattered for myself and my son.